Hi, my name's Stephen, and today we're looking at Philippians chapter 2 and verse 17. This verse sits in the context of Paul talking to the church in Philippi about them working out their salvation with fear and trembling. This sense of having reverence to God for who he is, but also what he's done for them. That they've been saved by such a wonderful salvation. What should their response be? Well, the response should be to take their salvation seriously, to take their relationship with God seriously, to look at their sin and resist temptation, to be those that choose to shine like lights to those around them. That if they've been reconciled into God's family, they should then have a desire growing in them to reconcile others as well. And yesterday we looked at the fact that we're to be those that hold fast to the word of truth, holding fast to the scriptures, the truth in which we can stand upon. Jesus describes that as being like a house built upon a rock. And then he goes on to talk about this. He says this in verse 17, or at the end of verse 16 and then into 17, it says this. So in the day of Christ, I may be proud that I did not run in vain or labour in vain. Even if I am to be poured out like a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. Paul's saying, if you work out your salvation with fear and trembling, then the race that he has run has not been in vain. And Paul knew what it was to suffer for the sake of Christ, knew what it was to be shipwrecked and beaten and hungered and persecuted and thrown out of cities and lose credibility and work really hard and be full of concern for the churches that he has planted. It's been a life that's been tough. He really has taken his cross to follow Christ into the work that God had given him to do. And so he's saying, hey, you know what? It's worth it. It's worth having run this particular race. It's worth having laboured. It's worth having been poured out like a drink offering on this sacrificial offering. It's worth that kind of sacrifice and that level of effort. If he can achieve Christ's glory upon the earth, if more people come to know Jesus and continue to stand in him, then you know what? It was all worth it. And do you know that for yourself? Is living for Christ, living the way that he's called us to do, even with all its sacrifices at points and difficulties. Do you know that it's worth it? Because there's an eternity coming. There's a day when Jesus will come again here. So in the day of Christ, as Paul says, the day of Christ, when he comes again, you can stand and say, you know what, it was worth running. Why? Because I made your name famous, Jesus. Yes, I did the work of evangelist. I looked after the poor. I built the church. I'll tell other people about Jesus. You know, it was worth it because I now present them. That's what Paul's doing with the church of Philippi. He's presenting them, saying, hey, these are the people that I reached for you, Jesus. Look, they're still standing in you. It was worth the labor. It was worth the sacrifice for you. It reminds me of the verse in Romans 12 where Paul talks about kind of the calling on us to be living sacrifices for God. And when we're called to the life with Christ, it's not necessarily an easy life. That's not what we're called to. We're called to a life of devotion. And when we talk about devotion, we're not just talking about raising our hands and singing on a Sunday, but really looking at every area of our life, saying, God, we want to line up with you. And we want to take a stand for you in this twisted and crooked generation, as Paul talked about in a few verses before this. And we want to shine for you. But knowing shining for you sometimes means that others are going to want to tear us down, going to want to mock us, going to want to attack our particular views. But you know what? Standing for Christ is worth it. It's worth the sacrifice. And so we want to run and labour and sacrifice like Paul did, knowing that we're not just following Paul, but actually also following Jesus. Said this, for the joy set before him, Jesus, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will also not grow weary and lose heart. We've got one who's gone before us into the place of suffering and sacrifice, and he's calling us on into the same thing, not just so that we sacrifice and suffer, but so we also might receive the joy that he has, that we might know the destiny of being with Jesus forever. Jesus says there's rewards for you coming, crowns in eternity, but we also have the joy of taking others with us as we continue to reach out to the world around us, this dark world, with the love and joy of Jesus. Let me encourage you, pray today. Say, God, help me as I face the wonderful joys that you've given me, but also the hardships, knowing that actually they are light and momentary compared to the eternal weight of glory that Jesus is storing up for you. Bless you, my friends. Speak soon.